What happens when 11 drones worth $500,000 attack a military airfield that cost tens of millions and is protected by multiple layers of defense? Most people would say nothing good, but that's exactly what happened over occupied Donbass, and the result was something nobody expected on either side. 11 Ukrainian FP-2 attack drones were flying low and fast. The target was an airfield from which Russian Shaheds took off night after night toward Ukrainian cities. The operators were sitting in a bunker, watching the outline of the runway slowly grow larger on their screens. 20 minutes to target. Everything was going according to plan. And that, when you're dealing with the most heavily fortified drone base in this theater of operations, meant only one thing. The Russians were expecting exactly that. The lead drone had covered 4 kilometers down the approach corridor when the air around it lit up. Tracers opened fire from a tree line, slowly and lazily at first it seemed, but a second later, a burst tore through the lead FP-2. The Ukrainian fixed-wing attack drone, about 4 meters long, carrying a kilogram-class fragmentation warhead and capable of striking targets 200 kilometers away, flipped over and crashed, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. The operator didn't even have time to react. Immediately after, a second machine gun opened up from the other end of the corridor, then a third. The clear corridor had teeth. What had shot down the drone was called a mobile fire group, a pickup truck buried in a tree line with a heavy machine gun in the bed. Nothing sophisticated, cheap, mobile, and lethal to anything flying slowly enough. This was the middle tier of Russian air defense. Too small a target for a fighter jet, but perfectly suited to destroying slow, low-flying drones. Think of them as toll booths on the only road leading to the airfield, except here the toll isn't paid in cash, it's paid with the drone itself. But then the tree line exploded. A rocket arrived from several kilometers behind the Ukrainian positions, and the first fire group vehicle burst into flames. Within seconds, the same thing happened to the second position, then the third. Whoever was returning fire knew the location of every single point with metric precision. The FP-2 that went down first had done exactly what it was sent to do. Before the attack wave, the Ukrainians had deliberately sent several cheaper drones down the corridor with one single purpose: to draw fire. A fire group that stays hidden is nearly invisible. One that opens fire on a drone gives itself away for a few seconds, and a few seconds is more than enough for artillery. The machine gun fires at over a kilometer and rarely misses. The slow FP-2 flying in a straight line is an ideal target. That's exactly why the Ukrainians deliberately exposed that target. The moment the weapon opened fire, the reconnaissance drone above the corridor recorded the muzzle flash, and the rocket that was already waiting with its launcher loaded did the rest. The coordinate had been obtained, the aim point locked. All that was left was final guidance, and the bait had just provided it. The rockets came down one after another along the corridor. The fire group scattered. Every destroyed vehicle meant one fewer machine gun in the path of the wave. Reconnaissance drones above the battlefield kept mapping positions faster than the crews could disperse. Pure tactics, executed to perfection. But 40 kilometers back, a Russian officer was watching what was happening and smiling, because the Ukrainians had just walked into a trap far more sophisticated than the one they had set themselves. Every drone they sent into the air to hunt the machine gun pickups was emitting a signal, a digital trail that led straight back to the people behind the controls. The Ukrainians thought they were hunting. In reality, they had become the prey. The officer was an electronic intelligence system operator. He had placed those machine gun pickups in the corridor not to stop anyone. They were the bait. Hunting them meant reconnaissance flights. Reconnaissance flights meant signal transmissions, and signals were what he had been waiting for since early that morning. While the Ukrainians were methodically destroying his fire groups, the antennas on his system were taking a bearing on every drone in the corridor. One bearing line toward the reconnaissance drone's signal. A second antenna a few kilometers away crossed it. At the intersection of those two lines, a coordinate appeared on the screen. The coordinate of the Ukrainian bunker. He had found the operators. All that was left was to reach them before they finished their mission. The antenna array on the roof of his vehicle did just one thing: listen. Every drone has to maintain communication with its pilot. This system intercepted those transmissions and took a direct bearing toward the source. Then it crossed that with a second listening post and traced the signal back to the person behind the controls. Every transmission was like a lamp switched on in an open field. The operator thinks he's the one doing the watching, but the system has been in that field since early morning and knows exactly where the beam of light is coming from. Inside the bunker, the crew felt nothing. The mission was running clean. They had marked the last fire group, transmitted the coordinates to the artillery position, and shifted their attention back to the airfield, with no idea they had just revealed their own position, and that the hunt for them had already begun. The path to the airfield was open. But beyond the corridor, the next tier was waiting, the one where being right doesn't guarantee survival. The wave crossed an invisible line, and satellite navigation cut out. The autopilots lost their reference points. The Russians, watching their electronic warfare systems work, had every reason to believe they had just won. They were wrong. The FP2s kept flying straight, as if nothing had happened, because what was supposed to blind them didn't matter at all. They weren't using satellite navigation in the first place. The Russian electronic warfare system floods the sky with noise on satellite frequencies, jamming the weak signal coming from space. A drone that depends on satellite becomes blind, flying low and slow over enemy territory. But not this one. The FP2 uses terrain correlation navigation. A cheap optical camera reads the ground beneath its belly and compares it to a map loaded before takeoff, correcting its heading in flight. You don't need a phone to get home from work. You know the contours of your own street. The FP2 had memorized its street. This navigation system has gone through 7 generations of improvements under combat conditions, so a complete satellite signal blackout changes nothing. Each of these drones costs around $50,000 and flies 200 kilometers, while a cruise missile costs over $1 million, so you can send 11 of them against a single airfield and still come out ahead, even if half gets shot down. But part of the wave was being guided manually for targets that might move, and manual guidance requires a live radio link with the operator, and that link was exactly what the electronic warfare system was blocking, which meant it couldn't stay put. The rocket came in low over the tree line. The electronic warfare system's antenna array was destroyed in a flat orange flash. The vehicle that 1 second earlier had been blinding the entire wave turned into scrap metal. The rocket had found it through the one thing the electronic warfare system couldn't help but do: transmit. To jam, it has to shout loud at the sky. That shout let the reconnaissance drone locate the source, transmit the coordinates, and guide the rocket straight onto the target. The vehicle was destroyed by its own signal. But there was another side to that coin. Ordinary satellite-guided munitions degrade under the same jamming they're trying to suppress. That's why the weapon against an electronic warfare system has to be either a munition hardened against interference or a drone that doesn't need satellite to begin with. While all of this was playing out in the air, something else was happening on the ground. A Russian vehicle dependent on satellite navigation got disoriented and drove out into an open field, convinced it was somewhere else entirely. It had been spoofed by a Ukrainian GPS substitution system called Provoka. It doesn't block the signal, it lies. It replaces the real coordinates with fake ones, which quietly install themselves in place of the real ones. The Russian driver thought he was receiving a clean signal from space. In reality, he was receiving a lie from a field a few kilometers away. It's not about shouting louder than the road signs. It's about silently replacing the signs themselves so the enemy drives straight into a lake, and then the bunker's time ran out. The bearing that Rubicon had started tracking in the corridor finally reached its target. A swarm of small Russian FPV drones, cheap racing quadcopters fitted with video goggles and a warhead on board, came screaming toward the operator's position. The bunker's electronic warfare protection system activated to meet them. It intercepted most of the swarm, but one drone didn't slow down, didn't veer off, and didn't react. It flew straight through the wall of noise that was supposed to bring it down, because it probably wasn't flying on a radio signal at all. Unspooling behind it was a thin fiber optic cable, unwinding from a spool during flight. Every other drone in the swarm was a voice in the radio spectrum that the Ukrainian system was jamming. This one was a wire between two tin cans. No amount of noise can jam a wire. So the operator stopped trying to bring it down with interference. Instead, an interceptor drone launched and tore the wire out of the sky. A second later, a soldier fired a compact launcher and a net deployed across 4 meters, catching the second drone and dragging it to the ground before it reached the bunker. The best fiber optic drones come out of Russian production capacity. There are long-range models with frequency hopping. Some operate via Starlink. None of that helps when you're tangled up in a net on the ground. The electronic intelligence system operator was watching his screen and seeing the bunker defend itself. Interceptors launching, nets deploying above the treetops. He had sent a dozen drones toward that position and was watching half of them go down without reaching the target. For the first time all morning, the hunter felt like he had become the prey. The operators were fighting for their lives, hunched over their screens while Russian drones fell around the bunker, running the mission and defending themselves at the same time. There was no time to look back. And above the airfield, the surviving FB-2 drones finally broke through the jamming zone. Ahead of them, in the morning light, a line of launchers opened up. Armed Shaheds on trucks, a reserve vehicle park, cranes for hoisting warheads onto the launchers, concrete bunkers along the sides. The entire machinery that had been sending drones toward Ukrainian cities night after night. The wave that destroyed all of it cost less than a single night of strikes from that base. 11 drones at around $50,000 each, $500,000 against a fortress worth tens of millions. The lead FP2 began its dive. In the final seconds, the communication channel with the operator cut out completely. The drone held its heading. No operator, no communication. The dive continued. The camera locked onto the target and held it to the end. The man had guided the drone for most of the flight and had chosen the target. The last few seconds, the machine finished it alone. Like a phone that keeps a face in focus as it moves through the frame, except here the face is a fuel tank and behind the camera is a warhead. The man had chosen the target. The computer simply kept it centered. Those final seconds were beyond the reach of any jamming. The second FP2 struck a mobile crane and bent the vehicle into a heap of twisted metal. Not a launcher, a crane, and that was the smartest target. A Shahed with its warhead weighs over 100 kilograms. You can't hoist that onto a launcher by hand. You need lifting equipment. Destroy the cranes and the airfield chokes. Even if every launcher survived, without the cranes they're just trucks in an open parking lot. You don't need to burn down the bakery if you can take out the ovens. The wave swept down the line, trucks with warheads, the vehicle park, cranes, bunkers. The stored warheads cooked off in secondary explosions, hurling fire and shrapnel hundreds of meters into the morning sky. In the spring, the Russians had turned this place into a fortress. Dozens of shelters, reinforced bunkers, fixed launchers, months of work and serious money, all of it to support thousands of Shaheds a month against Ukrainian cities, and the wave that destroyed all of it cost less than a single night of strikes from that base. 11 drones at around $50,000 each, $500,000 against a fortress worth tens of millions. Every warhead fell exactly where the operator had aimed it before entering the jamming zone. The airfield's launch machinery collapsed in on itself. By that point, Russian guns had started groping toward the bunker. The electronic intelligence officer had exhausted his options against the drones in the air and switched targets to the people behind the controls. Shells went out toward the position. The Ukrainians read it instantly. The Russians had given up chasing the drones and were going after the operators. The Ukrainian gun responded before the second salvo landed, thanks to the counter-battery radar system that tracks incoming shells in flight and traces their trajectory back to the firing point. The Russian gun crews knew the radar was active, so they fired a few quick bursts and immediately changed position. Before the response could arrive, it became a race. Who could fire first and pull back faster? The operators just had to hold on for a few more minutes while the wave finished its work. 2 minutes. That was all that was at stake. The last FP2 hit its target. A chain of explosions rolled across the site. The airfield that had been sending Shaheds toward Ukrainian cities night after night was destroyed in minutes. The operators, shaken, climbed out of the bunker and crawled toward the tree line, alive. Behind them, Russian shells swept the spot where they had just been sitting. The margin was measured in seconds. A few seconds the other way, and it would have been a different story. The kind that ends with empty chairs around a table somewhere in the rear. 40 kilometers back, the officer who had hunted these men all morning looked at the burning field he would never be able to use again. The Shaheds that had taken off from that airfield night after night, chasing Ukrainian families into entryways before dawn, would never take off from there again. The cities that base had been bombing experienced their first quiet night in a long time. If this video held your interest, hit like and subscribe to the channel, and watch the episode next on how Ukraine destroyed an entire Russian port using nothing but drones.